Do you have great relationships with people? Because that's what lasts forever. Money doesn't. Your product, your service, your all that other stuff, it doesn't. We all know this, but your relationships with people last forever. So be curious about people, because I fully believe that everyone that you meet, no matter where they are in life, no matter who they are actually really fascinating. If you took the time to ask them some questions and learn about them, their life story is fascinating. Even if on the outside looking in, you would think it's kind of boring, they just kind of had this ho-hum life, it's still absolutely fascinating because of the way they face the challenges, who they are because of it. And when we look at people that way and interact with people that way, it changes the way you do business. It changes the way that you live your life.
The Thomas Green podcast is owned and made possible by Ethical Marketing Service. If your business is struggling with Google or Facebook ads, maybe you're frustrated figuring it out, or there's a performance issue, Ethical Marketing Service has worked on hundreds of accounts and we can help in this area. We offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, and for every direct account we look after, we sponsor a child in a developing nation with food, water and education. If you would like to find out if we can help, it's a free, no salesy consultation call, and the link is in the description. Enjoy the episode. Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Kyle Gillette. Kyle, welcome.
Hey, Thomas. Thank you. Appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a business coach and I focus on systems and mindsets for the people that I work with, typically small business owners that are in the fields of what I like to say is I work with business owners that are in the field, literally working in construction or on the dirt or out doing the jobs with their employees, and they shouldn't be. They need to be in the office, working on their systems, working on their strategy, and running a business rather than running a job. And so I help those folks that are in the fields, whether it's a blue collar job or business or a different kind, but either way, they're spending way too much time doing the work of the job rather than the work of the business. And I help them get to the mindset of, okay, I'm running a business, not running a job. I help them with the systems, processes, mindsets, all that to make it possible.
Thank you for that. In terms of why you think that is, why people get drawn in so much to those day-to-day activities, what comes to mind for you there?
Yeah, I think it's the default. It's pretty easy to jump into a job that you call your business and do the work of it because you're good at it. You're really good at it. You wouldn't run a business, you wouldn't start a business if you weren't really good at particular tasks of that business. And so it's easy to go into the natural default of it. But obviously, to get out of it, it's going to take a lot more work. And to get out of it is a lot more people side of things, a lot more people work, which is those conversations with people, the difficult conversations that require accountability, which require follow-up, which require a lot more attention to detail about the person, who they are, what motivates them, all those types of things. And the reality is that's harder than the task of running a business. The people side is harder, but that's what makes any business truly successful, because when you have the right people in place, you as a business owner can step out and out of the way and be able to let them do their jobs really well. And you support them to make that possible instead of doing the work for them.
It's a great point and well worth highlighting. You mentioned processes in your answer. And I found having these conversations, either systems or processes, I found that the topic of systems quite difficult to share any valuable information in this format. So in the sort of audio podcast format, if you were going to explain it to someone, maybe with an example, what do you tell them?
Yeah, know your data. Know your numbers. I have a lot of clients that I first start working with, and I'll start asking about what's going on with your business, and we'll ask questions about their finances, ask questions about what they do to get to where they are. And often people know their numbers to a certain degree when it comes to their, profit and loss or the balance sheet or those types of things. But what they don't know is the nuances of how they got there. They're not clear on, so in order to get this sale, I had 7 conversations, I had 2 coffee meetings, and I reached out to 25 people. right? And they don't know those numbers at all. And your system is knowing those numbers. And then you can turn that into any other part of your business as well. It doesn't just have to be sales. It could be the marketing side. It could be the product development side. How many times do you have to create different iterations of this product before it becomes usable, before someone actually wants to buy it? Getting those numbers figured out. Because if you're tracking your numbers, then you have a leg to stand on, because you know what's working, what's not working. And once you figure out what's working, there's your system. You track it. You know what's working, so you follow the numbers and then replicate that and iterate and improve it. And that's all there really is to a system. And every business's systems are going to be different in their specifics. But overall, everybody does sales. Everybody has a service or a product to sell. And the business owners and leaders need to stay on top of the data behind those things. You do that, and you've got a good system in place.
Have you got any favorite stories about going from, let's say, no data to data and what the implications were there?
Yeah, I worked with a herbalist. So she's a Chinese herbalist. She's been doing it for 20 years, really good at what she does. She has hundreds, maybe even thousands of customers. And she was doing pretty well financially, but she didn't have a pulse on why she was doing well and how she got the clients and what she needed to do to get repeat customers or to get new customers. And so over the course of working with her, we established, okay, this is what works for your business. Having these conversations with people and talking to them and having that one-to-one conversation. Well, how do you generate more of those? Okay, well, generate more of those through follow-up emails, through simple follow-up emails with old customers, and to get them to come in again. Well, that generated a bunch of new revenue for her, because people forget that they can go to the herbalist and have help on whatever's going on with them. And then we started talking about, well, what can you do so that you're not doing all this work? Well, she had an employee, and that employee is actually very skilled, but she wasn't training that employee to do more than that employee was already doing. We got her trained up, and now she was able to delegate so much to this employee. And at one of the last meetings I had with her, we set up this goal setting session, and we established these 90-day goals. And about 4 months later, I had a conversation with the business owner, and she made this big deal about how she was able to double her revenue, which was the goal. She was able to hand off a ton of the work to this one employee, and she was able to take her first 4-week vacation of her life as a result of increasing the revenue, being able to let go of the work and give it to this employee. And it was amazing. And it's because she figured out what worked. She figured out through her systems how to replicate income, how to replicate conversations, how to get people to come back to her, those types of things. It's simple, but it requires focused, intentional work and paying attention again to your numbers.
Well, you led me nicely to the next question, and that was about goals. So it's a widely talked about topic. If you were to summarize your thoughts or your philosophy on goals, what do you say?
Yeah, a lot of people know about SMART goals. And so if there's a tactical approach, that's the approach that I use, but I put a twist on it. And my philosophy on goals is you better have them, and you need to have a relationship with them. Put them in front of you. And the way that I encourage all my clients to approach their goals, besides the tactical side of it, is imagine as if you've already succeeded in achieving this goal. And what is life like because you've already achieved this goal? What is your business like? What is your team like? What are you like because you've achieved this goal? How does that feel? What does that specifically look like? As if you're telling a story to a friend 6 months from now, you're sharing that story of all the success you have from achieving this goal. And what that does for us is it helps our subconscious solve the problem of how do I achieve this goal? Because you're telling your subconscious that you already did. And since your brain doesn't know the difference between reality and what you give it, then it fixes that gap over time. And it's a beautiful way to achieve goals. And there's a ton of research behind this approach to, you could call it manifestation, you could call it whatever you want, but basically you're projecting your future and your brain fills in the gaps for you. And it's one of the first things that I encourage people to do is create that compelling story. If you don't have a compelling story of where you're going as a leader or in your business, then you're not very excited about it. And if you're not very excited about it, the people that are working with you definitely won't be, and your customers won't be. And so you're not going to get there. So create that compelling story as if it already happened or it's happening, but you're jumping ahead 6 months to a year. So I talk about selling my book. I talk about these things that haven't quite happened yet, but I talk about the specific numbers. I talk about the way it makes me feel, talk about the specifics of what it's going to be like to be at that place. And then my brain has to fix that problem that it doesn't exist yet. So that's one of the big first pieces. And then of course, SMART goals is the normal, be specific, be able to measure it. And when you talk about measurables, a lot of people don't recognize the value of the lead measures. So these are the things that you have 100% control over, not the result of the work, but the 100% control. So the number of calls you can make in a day, the number of conversations you can have, the number of specific things you can do to move your business forward that you have 100% control over. A lot of people don't track this and don't know what those things are. Once you get that dialed in, you can replicate that, you can adjust it and nuance it, which helps your business significantly. And then a lot of people a lot of people say it's attainable. And that's fine. I think that's a waste. If it's realistic, it's attainable. Or if it's results oriented, it's attainable. So for me, it's all about accountability. And often businesses crumble because they don't have high levels of accountability. I mean, we hear that I think it's 80% of businesses after 5 years close. Well, often it's because there's no accountability or not good enough accountability in place for that business owner and that team. If you have that in place, the likelihood of you being successful skyrockets. And there's stats behind this as well. And then, of course, is it results oriented? Is it time bound? But fundamentally, at the heart of all that is the accountability side of, okay, are you going to do what you said you're going to do? And since you told this future story to your brain, and you're going to be accountable to that because you're committed to doing what you're saying you're going to do, your brain goes, okay, I need to solve this problem that you've created for me, because my reality isn't that I'm making $1 million this year. My reality isn't that I have 3 new employees. And then you stay accountable to that new reality that you created for the future and you make it happen. It sounds very simple and basic, but it is, yet it's difficult to pull off, of course.
Well, if you focus on the things like you said that you have 100% control over, then I can totally understand how, providing you, as you say, have accountability, then I guess the data can change. But other than that, I mean, like you say, you have control over it. So providing it is what you want, the goal is definitely what you want, then no reason why you can't achieve it. Have you got any thoughts about the types of goals that people set that they're not 100% convinced about?
Yeah, I have a client right now that's in that place. He's stuck between, do I continue running my real estate business, or do I expand my real estate business? So do it himself and maybe one other person, or expand it and add 4 or 5 agents. And he can't decide. And so for him, he's just stuck. And so we had a pretty heavy conversation the other day, and ultimately it was about trust. It was about, he trusts himself. He trusts that he can do the work. He trusts that he can train his team, but does he trust his team? And so for him, he was stuck on, I'm not sure if I can trust my team. I'm not sure they're ready for this. And so that's the problem that had to be resolved for him in order to believe in the goal more. And so when you don't believe in your goal for some reason, or there's a reason behind it, you're not motivated because, do you really want to do it? Is there something in the way that's preventing you because you don't really want to do it? Or is it an ability problem where you're actually not capable of doing it? And what can you do to resolve either one of those things? So for him, it was a kind of a motivation problem. He's not sure if he can trust his team. So how do we resolve that? Talk with your team. Very simply, have one-to-one conversations with your team and figure out where they stand. And your trust level is likely to go up because he didn't hire stupid people. Most people don't hire stupid people. So you usually can trust your team to do a good job. And if you can't trust your team, get them out. People hold on to employees way too long. Get them out. And so often the reason that people have such a hard time believing in that goal is because they've either the trust issue, or there's this component that they don't realize is missing. And sometimes that can be their systems as well. So.
Well, you briefly touched on accountability. If you had a team and let's say you weren't keeping them accountable, what are the first few steps that you'd take with that?
Yeah. Number one is expectations. What what is expected of each team member and by when, right? Often I find it interesting that everybody has a job description, right? You go into your job and you have a job description. And then if you ask somebody when was the last time they looked at their job description, when they first looked at it on Indeed, right? The last time they looked at it was when they applied for the job. They never look at it again. And that's a total miss on the part of the employer and the employee as well. So instead, I highly recommend employers create what are called scorecards. And it's not here, this is a list of duties. The people that you hire aren't stupid. They don't need a list of duties of what they need to get done. What they need is expectations clarified. So if you're a salesperson or if you're supposed to help develop a certain product or service, whatever, then the employer needs to describe this is the expectation within the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, that you're responsible to generate $100,000 worth of sales or a million or $10 million worth of sales. That's what they're responsible for. How do you go about doing it? Well, they were hired because they have the expertise to figure that out. But let's stay on top of what it is specifically they're expected of and what they're responsible for, and then keep them accountable to that. Often it's about tasks and stuff like that, and those things need to happen. But I want to know what are the things that I'm responsible for when it comes to the numbers I need to produce or the quality I need to produce, those types of things. And if you get that dialed in for everybody in your organization, then you can hold them accountable to an objective standard. Without that in place, it's really hard to hold people accountable because it's way too subjective. You put those scorecards in place, and there's way more details to how those work, but you put those scorecards in place of what they're responsible for. And now you can have a really productive conversation with somebody when they're not hitting their numbers, because you can talk to them about, okay, so you were supposed to produce, $500,000 worth of sales this quarter, and you've generated $400,000. What's going on here? And you have a conversation about that. And because you know their numbers, their results, but then you can also look at the work they're doing to get there. You can hold them accountable to those lead measures that are helping them get there. And because they're also aware of what they're doing, why it's not working or why it is working, they can improve the things that are working and maybe eliminate the things that aren't. And then you get to your goals more understandably. You know why you're getting there. And then this can be a repeatable thing. So first thing when it comes to accountability is you have to define expectations. And a scorecard is a great way to do that in the business world.
A very data-based approach. I like it.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, you've got some expertise in productivity. I think that teams can sometimes struggle with that. So what are your thoughts on that topic?
Again, it's back to those clear expectations, defining what is expected of each person on the team. And when that is clearly defined, now all of a sudden, when someone is not holding up their end of the bargain in that regard, you can have conversations about that. And one of the biggest things that I've noticed with the people that I work with, I had a workshop yesterday that I did on accountability, actually. And we talked about this whole process of how to do it in the workplace and what that looks like. But I made a comment about open-ended questions, and that when you're working with someone, and especially when you're holding them accountable, that you need to be asking open-ended questions. And that was just this ad lib side comment I made that wasn't really part of the presentation, but it became the highlight of the presentation for almost everybody that heard it because it was such a big deal to them. And the reason I bring it up here is if you want to get more productive, you need to engage the brains of everybody on your team, engage their ability to be creative, innovative, collaborative. And if you're not asking open-ended questions and you're just telling them what to do by giving them a checklist of what to do or expecting them to know, then you're not going to get the most out of that individual, and they're definitely not going to be near as satisfied. So when you plug in open-ended questions with people, that is going to make a huge difference. So when someone, often people come to I had a conversation with a client this week, and she was interrupted twice in the middle of our coaching call by this urgent emergent type stuff. And so she quickly dealt with it and got all worked up about it and told them what to do. And then after the first time I said, hey, what could you have done differently in that situation, and used questions instead. And she wasn't quite sure what to do. And she's like, well, I really want to solve the problem and move things forward and get things going. And by the time we were done with the call, I had challenged her, whenever that urgency comes, figure out where you're feeling it in your body, where you're feeling it in your head, wherever it's coming from. Take a freaking breath and then go and ask the person, what do you think? That's it. As they come to you with that emergency, what do you think we should do? And then that slows down the whole thing, because unless someone's arm is cut off or something like that, it's not really an emergency. You can spend an extra 2 minutes on the situation and let them figure out the problem and solve it. And you collaborate with them to solve it. But often employees are consistently farming out their thinking to their employers and going, here's my problem, solve it for me. And I likened it to a dog that's pawing at your leg to get a treat from you. And so the employee comes up and paws at your leg, and the treat is an answer to the problem. And so you give them the answer to the problem, and they're happy. They walk away with their tail wagging because they got their need resolved. But instead, you make the puppy do something like sit down. In this case, obviously, people aren't puppies, and we're not training people, that kind of thing. But you pause the conversation, you pause the emergency, and say, well, in this situation, what would you do? I don't know. Okay. If you did know what you would do, what would you do? I don't know. Okay. What resources do you have available to you? If I wasn't here, what would you do? Right? Because those are all the excuses that I've heard from employers of the questions or the resistance that their employees give them. But ultimately, when you do that, that's the best thing you can do to become more productive. Hands down, there's nothing greater than that. There's these tactics about emails and time blocking. That's great, and that works too. But this one right here, ask open-ended questions and don't solve your employees' problems. That is going to make you thousands, if not millions of dollars, just depending on the size of your business.
Yeah, I've also heard it said that, if you want people to keep coming back to you, then keep solving their problems. But if you want them to be able to solve them for themselves eventually, then you need to teach them how to do that. But you touched on something which I was going to ask you about, and that is the values. Perhaps there's a crossover between, engaging people who feel engaged with the actual goal that you're going for. Does the values cross over there?
Yeah, I mean, we want to make sure that those that we're working with are lined up with our culture, lined up with our values. And one of the things that I urge my clients to do is to know those and define them and talk about them. Because if the people that are working with you find out that your values don't line up with theirs, that's a good thing, because that means they have a reason to leave. And what you don't want is people that don't line up with your values as a business owner. You don't want them to be there. No, they're not bad people. And we're not talking about ethics here. We're just talking about a values miss. If you're in an organization where the value is creativity or high aesthetics, and you work in a more of a sterile environment, then you come in with someone with high aesthetic desires and creativity, it's not going to be a good fit. And you figure that out quickly, that's a good thing. It's good for you to leave. You're not a fit for that. And the same is true with the employer as a fit for you. So that's a good thing. And more importantly, on the positive side, when those line up, there's a beautiful synergy. And then there's can be some nuances to how things play out because the values line up and they fit. And they serve as a filter, right? So when a customer comes up and there's a problem to be solved, and the employee has to deal with it, and there's nobody else that can deal with it, they're the one. Well, because you've been talking to them about the values and been putting it in front of them over and over, those are going to be the filter for that customer interaction. If the value is the customer is always right, which I think is a crappy value, but anyway, if that's the value, then that employee is going to filter that situation through that and make a decision based on that. If the value is be serving, which I think is a better value than the customer is always right, that employee is going to come up with a better way to serve that customer in that situation. And then they have a leg to stand on, they have an idea of what they can do, and it's going to be way more impactful, way more helpful for the organization, the customer, and of course the employee. So values are vital, and keeping them in front of your employees. I have an optometrist that I work with, and probably once a month, he has a meeting with his team where he reiterates the values, and he asks them questions about the values and how they see them and what they're doing with them. And that's the type of reinforcement that's necessary, because a business is really run on the culture of it, right? The values of it versus the tactics, because those values are going to serve as the filter for everything. And they're a lot easier to work with when you're lost, when you're not sure what to do in a given situation, because you can't have a tactic for every single situation that comes across an employee's or a leader's desk. So that's the value to me of values.
Would you mind sharing what your values are in your business?
Yeah. So one of them is excellence. Another one is learning. I might have to look for a second here. Another one is gratitude, integrity. I have 7, so I don't have them all memorized. Courage. Let me see. Yeah, and service. So 6 of them. Yeah. So those are my 6. At first, it was SAGE, self-awareness, accountability, growth, and empowerment. And I realized that was more like this umbrella of a framework in which I work with my clients and I do my business. But I needed a layer in to that, which is the values that I mentioned: the excellence, service, integrity, gratitude, those types of things. And you can't always, it's difficult to always work through those, but if they're in front of you, like mine are, that's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the SAGE mindset. Do you mind elaborating?
Yeah, SAGE was out of an experience working in a men's mentoring program. So I lived in and then worked in a men's mentoring program for 9 years, from 2005 to about 2014. And in that program, we helped guys that are 18 to 25 find traction in life. They were typically off track because of drugs or alcohol or rough family upbringing, or addiction to video games or something like that. So they're just really off track. And they came to live in the facility for 6 months to a year to build what we call the life map. And during that time, I worked there. And the first year I was there, I lived in the house with these guys and helped them figure out life skills. The irony was, when I first moved in, I was completely lost in life. I was 30 pounds overweight, super stressed in life, and had no idea what I wanted to do with myself. So I needed the program just as much as the guys in it, which was a very humbling experience for me to come in and be like, I'm going to teach you how to live your life and get a life map dialed in. And I was the one that was just as lost, if not more lost than they were. But I was able to get traction because I followed the program as well and helped lots of guys get traction too. So that happened, and then continued working there. And the whole time I was mentored by a gentleman that is still running the program after 30 plus years, but he had run multiple successful businesses and then retired young in his early 50s and started this program. And he mentored me every Tuesday at lunch for an hour and a half. We would have conversations about everything from life to work to the students to God to just every single topic under the sun. And I
Sounds
got
like
to
you've got some
glean
sort of rich dad, poor dad thing going on here.
a little bit, exactly. And I gleaned so much wisdom from him. And after working there for a while, I ended up getting married and having a couple kids. And then my wife and I decided that we wanted to be close to either my parents or her parents so that we could raise our kids with grandparents. And so ultimately we moved up Pacific Northwest where her parents are. And I began my journey over here. That was a dumpster fire because the first few months we lived with her parents, which was fine, but I felt like the biggest loser ever because I couldn't get a job. I applied to 50 jobs. I had 9 years of management experience because in that program, I ran a pet resort and then I ran the whole program. So I knew what I was doing when it came to leading people. I'm leading these guys that have never had a job in their life to prevent a dog from eating another dog because it was a pet resort, and to take care of customers. And I mean, I had skills and it was driving me nuts. 50 jobs and I couldn't find one. So I finally got one and I hated it, quit that one, got another job. And I really enjoyed that one, worked there for 2.5 years. And it was an HR job in a mega church. And that's where I got exposed to personality assessments. And then I learned that I'm naturally gifted at interpreting the results of these assessments and being able to read what it means and help people to apply those results and make shifts in their life that they want to make because of what they saw in the results. But those aren't mine. It wasn't something that I created. And as I went from working in that job to starting my own business, I realized that I needed to create my own framework. And so I started working on a leadership acronym because I wanted to have my own thing, but I love acronyms too, so it's memorable. And one morning, 3 a.m., I wake up and I hear a voice tell me self-awareness. And I had been working on, like I said, for months, this trying to come up with an acronym, but nothing was coming together. It was just stupid combinations of letters that didn't make any sort of sense. And I heard that, and for whatever reason, it clicked. And now, in retrospect, I'm like, why didn't I think of that earlier? But anyway, I jumped out of bed and I ran into the kitchen and spent the next 4 hours just shivering in my boxers, scribbling down the first 4 hours worth of content about Sage. But that piece was the first letter of Sage, which is self-awareness. And the way that I use the framework or describe the framework is, if you imagine your leadership like a leadership house, self-awareness is the foundation to that leadership. Without self-awareness, you can't build any sort of leadership on it. And we were talking about values before. Values are the rebar to that foundation. They put the pressure on that foundation to keep it sturdy and strong and not cracking. Accountability is the nails that holds that leadership house together. Without accountability, your leadership house will crumble. And we've seen that in lots of businesses. And I'm not talking about ethics. I'm just talking about mistakes people make. That's why 80% of the businesses fail. There's this lack of accountability in place to help them continue working on it and nailing everything together. Growth is the walls and the roof. So this is the part that you get to remodel, right? In any home over time, most people end up remodeling their house in one way, shape, or form. And if they don't remodel the walls in the home, they're going to adjust things within, furniture, paint the walls, whatever. But that's what we do as leaders. We need to make sometimes major and sometimes minor adjustments to our leadership. And that's the mindset, the growth mindset that requires us to do that. And of course, the roof, you get to a certain point where you need to believe that there's another story, there's another level to your leadership. And then, you quote, raise the roof. And I know that doesn't perfectly fit the metaphor, but that's ultimately what great leaders do. And then empowerment's the windows and the doors. And this is where people can see into your leadership and observe, what is this guy about? What is this gal about? How does she lead? Do I want to be a part of that? And then eventually they see that you're empowering, that you want your team to grow, you grow yourself, all these things, high integrity, high accountability, and they want to join you. So then they apply or they find out and they get recruited, and then they join your team, they walk through that door. But the opposite is true too. There's people on your team that are very, very capable, and they're so capable that they shouldn't be under your leadership anymore. And so you empower them so well that they're looking out that window and going, wow, there's an opportunity over there to start my own business or to join this other team. And because you're such a good leader as a Sage leader, you're self-aware enough to be okay that they leave. You're self-confident enough that it's okay that they leave. And you're accountable to them being the best leader that they can be. And so you're okay with them leaving. And of course, you have a growth mindset about them and you want to empower them. So you happily encourage them to pursue whatever it is that's best for them. And then they walk out that door. And it's open, so someone else walks back in as well. So that's kind of Sage in a nutshell. And that's how I help my clients to become Sage leaders, is in all those particular pillars.
Congratulations on coming up with that. I think it's really cool, and I totally understand why you're scribbling at 3 a.m. in the morning if it's working out for you coming up with that. So I appreciate that. I said beforehand that every person I speak to, I like to ask the question, what does success mean to you? And I'm sure you got a good answer. So what comes to mind for you there?
I was thinking about this probably 3 years ago, and it had to do with my kids. What do I want for my kids? So I have a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And at the time, so 3, 5, and 7 at that time. And I was like, what do I really want for my kids? What do I want to instill in my kids? And the simple answer for me was love God, love learning, and be grateful, right? Or smile. Either way, those were the 3 things. And to me, those are the 3 things. If I love learning, if I love God, and I'm grateful, I have gratitude and show people that I appreciate them, I'm going to win. And whatever that winning success definition is dependent on the person. And maybe for some people, success is $1 million, but I know someone that runs a nonprofit, and she might make 60, maybe $75,000 in her nonprofit, but she's helping trafficked kids that are under 18 figure out life and get them out of sex traffic. And that's success to her. That's amazing. And someone else that I know runs a 9-figure real estate business. That's success to him. Both are beautiful and both are success. But I guarantee, I know the lady loves God, and I know she loves learning, and I know she's grateful for everything that she has. And so for me, that's what success is. And that's what I try to instill in my kids. And of course, I try to embody that as much as I can in myself.
Great answer. Thank you. Is there anything that I should have asked you about today?
I would say I have a book coming out that's going to touch on a ton of different mindsets and habits that I'm kind of hinting at in this conversation. So I can mention a little bit about that book and the heart behind it. But otherwise, I appreciated the interview, and I think you did a great job.
Any closing thoughts for us?
Be curious. Just stay curious about other people, because your success depends on other people. That's it. If you're not curious and you're not asking those questions, you're not being open with your questions and not open with yourself, your likelihood of success will diminish. And I'm kind of projecting my definition of success on there, because my definition of success is like 60% people, 40% money. And what I mean by that is it leans more towards, do you have great relationships with people? Because that's what lasts forever. Money doesn't. Your product, your service, your all that other stuff, it doesn't. We all know this, but your relationships with people last forever. So be curious about people, because I fully believe that everyone that you meet, no matter where they are in life, no matter who they are actually really fascinating. If you took the time to ask them some questions and learn about them, their life story is fascinating. Even if on the outside looking in, you would think it's kind of boring, they just kind of had this ho-hum life, it's still absolutely fascinating because of the way they face the challenges, who they are because of it. And when we look at people that way and interact with people that way, it changes the way you do business. It changes the way that you live your life. And so that's what I would say is be curious. And that's the learning side of things, right? Love learning.
Great answer. I think you've given a lot of value today. So thank you. If people want to hire you or follow you, where do they go?
Yeah, go to sagemindset.com. Find me there. And then, of course, you type that in on the internet, you're going to find my podcast and social media and all that type of stuff.
Kyle, thank you for being a great guest today.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.